Vince, what it means is I guess we have to have a conversation of perception versus production. That to me is really what it boils down to, and what you view. And this isn't me telling you what you should or shouldn't think, but essentially as a analyst, as a fan, as a coach, whatever hat you want to put on, how you perceive Ian Book is going to determine how you perceive what Notre Dame has to replace at the position.
Yeah.
So, when I look at it, I see a guy that, was a smart, tough, good leader that, was 30-5 as a starter because he played on a really good football team with a really good defense. And for the most part, some really good offensive players around him.
Sure.
And his level of production was really up and down. I thought he was at his best in 2018. The numbers say that. And, that was Notre Dame's best stretch of football under him, scoring-wise, yards-wise, passing-wise, was during that 2018 season. The vast majority of his 300-yard games were then during that period. And then, of course, last year, his yards went down. His yards per attempt went way down. His touchdowns went up, which was good. But there was a lot of other indicators that showed he had taken a little bit of a step back. And then, of course, this past year, from a production standpoint, it took a huge step back. So
yeah, no kidding.
The question you have to ask yourself is, did Notre Dame win this season? Did they go 10-0 in the regular season this year because Ian Book is just this exceptional playmaker that just always makes the big plays in the money situations? And I don't know if we can really say that a whole lot. There have been times here and there, but, we think of the Virginia Tech game in 2019, but I would argue that better quarterback play the first 3.5 quarters would have meant that they wouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. I thought the one time I could really point to and say, wow, they won that game because Ian Book made some big time money plays was the Clemson game this year. I thought he had made some mistakes in the middle of that game, but there were a lot of people that made mistakes in the middle of that game. He had also made some plays to set up scores. And, those plays he made late in the game, not just the deep ball to Avery Davis, which was important, but also the scramble and then finding Avery Davis in a contested throwing lane, which is something he did not do a whole lot of in his career. So, that was one of those times when the lights were brightest, when Ian Book had to play outside of his normal play, and he did that. And so there were some times like that, but I won't make the case that they were 30-5 because of Ian Book. I just don't think you can make that argument. I think when you look at Notre Dame's record against ranked opponents during that stretch, you can't make that argument. When you look at how Notre Dame played on the big stage, you can't make that argument. Ian Book played what he needed to do to not lose you football games.
Sure.
I don't know if you could say he did a lot of things to win you football games, and especially against the better teams in the schedule.
Right.
So, that's how I look at it. Now, other people are going to look at it different. Other people are going to look at, he 30-5 and he's second behind Brady Quinn in yards and touchdowns and all these statistics that have more to do with just how many games you played more than it does about your actual production, on a per game basis. And so, I've pointed out how his career touchdowns aren't that much more in 3+ years, aren't that much more than what Justin Fields did in basically a year and a half, you know? So it's all relative, and how you view what needs to be replaced is how you view Ian Book's role in Notre Dame's 30-5, because the case for him is easy. Well, they went to undefeated regular seasons and
those
two
are all
playoff
team
berths.
records, man.
Right. It's like, we've seen in Major League Baseball, what was it? The Jacob deGrom for the Mets a couple years ago had an ERA below 2, but he wasn't plus, over 10 wins by very much. And then we've seen years where guys win 20 games and have ERAs in the 4s, and because it's a team record. And so you have to look at what was his role in that. I think there are quarterbacks you can point to and say, that team won because of that quarterback. I think, Clemson the last couple of years, I think won games because of Trevor Lawrence, because I don't think they were as talented as they were in 2018 or 2016, or even to some degrees in 2015. So, Joe Burrow obviously was an elite playmaker in 2019. LSU won because of, Joe Burrow's ability to execute that offense at an incredibly high level. I don't know if I would accept that for Ian Book. So, but that's kind of what makes this discussion fun. And it's a never ending discussion because people have kind of come down on their sides. Ian Book was the ultimate winner, and yeah, they're not moving. But, I think for me, Vince, it's one of those things where the hardest part to replace from an Ian Book standpoint is you're losing a leader, you're losing a high character player, you're losing someone who, I think in a lot of ways was the epitome of what Notre Dame wanted in a quarterback, and that was protect the ball at all costs. Don't turn it over, and when things break down, we need you to go make a play. And I think Ian Book did that very well. I think he's someone that Brian Kelly trusted a great deal, and to do what Brian Kelly wanted to do, and that's important because a coach is going to have a lot more confidence to kind of win with defense if you know that Ian Book isn't going to lose it for you,
sure.
That kind of thing. So is a very good complementary player, but for me, I have to look at it and say the 30-3 is great. But I think Notre Dame was like 6-5 against ranked opponents the last, 3 years, 3 years. You look at you go back to when Tony Rice was the quarterback, and you look at what his numbers were against top 10 teams. It was a whole different animal. 7 wins over top 10 teams, things like that. So there's different types of winning. Is it just the overall record, or are you winning the big games? Tony Rice had more wins over top 10 opponents than Ian Book had over top 25 opponents during his career.
And
so
it's not for lack of opportunities either.
Right. So, but again, that's also a team thing.
It's sure.
Right?
Yeah,
Tony
no doubt.
Rice played on some really good teams.
And he didn't play defense.
Right. Ian Book didn't have,
Right.
As much as I've said Ian Book had better weapons than people believe, there was no Rocket the last couple of years. There was no Ricky Waters, even at running back or flanker. I mean, Tony Rice played with some really good football players too, and had some really good defenses too. So, but my point is, I just think when you look at Ian Book, replacing the intangibles is going to be a lot harder than replacing the production. I think the production will be relatively easily replaced, and we'll get into that. The question that I have is, can you replace the leadership? Because leadership isn't just about, going out making plays. It's, do your players believe in you?
Right.
And will they play for you, and will they give their best for you? And at no point in time during this season did I really feel like the Notre Dame players weren't competing, even in losses. I think maybe the Clemson title game would be the only example. But the Notre Dame players played hard against Alabama.
Sure.
Not offensively as well. And they battled. And I do think that is indicative of the fact that they had a scrapper, a gamer, a tough kid at quarterback. And
I agree.
So I think that part, we have to see if that part can be replaced. Because there's a thing. Ian Book took a lot of hits in his career. Sometimes because, a lot of times because of his own.
Yes.
But, he was a kid that played through a lot of bumps and bruises as well.
Sure.
And those are the intangibles that I think are going to be a lot harder to replace. Those are the question marks that I have. I have no doubt that whether it's Jack Cohen or Drew Pine or Brendan Clark or Tyler Buckner, that replacing Ian Book's production won't be that challenging. Through 15 touchdown passes in 12 games last year.
Right.
That part's not going to be hard to replace. Can the other parts be replaced? That's a bigger question for me.
Well, and I think it's important to understand, and I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that, Ian Book's one of the tougher kids out there. He's for lack of a better term, he's a gamer, right? I
think that's a great term. I think that's a perfect term for him.
He just is. And I will never question his heart or his want to win or any of that. That was never in question. And I think he's one heck of a leader. And I think, and I'm kind of echoing what you were saying, but at the same time, I feel like it needs to be repeated. Replacing him as a leader on this team is going to be the hard part. That's going to be the challenge, because he led that team off the field. By example, all of that. I think that it's really important to understand that, and nobody is saying that he wasn't that way. It was some of the production issues that you and I would pick apart a little bit more. And I agree with you. I don't think that replacing the production is going to be all that hard. I think if you just took the numbers from 2020 and you put them up against whatever the numbers are going to be in 2021, I think they're going to be better in 2021.
Yeah.
I really
do. Just about every category.
Yes, I really do believe that. And that's nothing against Ian Book. I don't want this to be an Ian Book.
Well, I mean, it is kind of against Ian. I mean, it's okay to say that, right? Like, it's okay to be critical of his play. It's not personal. It doesn't mean we dislike him. We're analysts. If we can't be critical of someone's play without feeling we have to apologize for 5 minutes so that people don't get mad, then, it is what it is. People are going to get mad because we didn't say Ian Book's the greatest quarterback of all time at Notre Dame. Like, there was literally someone sent me an article that somebody's trying to debate whether Ian Book was better than Brady Quinn. That's the level of insanity that we're dealing with here. We're not going to change anyone's mind, and apologizing for being critical is not going to make them less mad we didn't just say it's going to be impossible for Notre Dame to replace Ian Book. They're going to go 2-10 next year because they don't have Ian Book. We're analysts, and so we're going to call this down the middle of the field. So I don't want you to have to feel like you have to apologize for that. But let me say something else about this. Part of the challenge of replacing Ian Book from both a production and especially a leadership and a tangible standpoint is there is no clear heir apparent. And I think that's the part that we're not necessarily talking about, where at a lot of these other places, there was sort of a line of succession that was coming, whether it was an incoming recruit that you knew was going to kind of be that guy, that would, whether it was sort of the backup stepping into that next role. There was always sort of a clear line of succession at those places, when you look at like Ohio State, when they lost Dwayne Haskins, it was going to be either Joe Burrow was supposed to be that guy. Well, then they brought in Justin Fields, and you get this big 5-star grad transfer. That's not Jack Cohn, right? Jack Cohn didn't play last year. It's a different scenario. Alabama, I mean, you knew it was Jalen Hurts, and then if he played his entire career, it was going to be Tua Tagovailoa was going to take over at some point in time, and then after that, it was going to be Mac Jones, and after Mac Jones, it's going to be Bryce Young. You're looking to go Oklahoma. You knew who the quarterback was going to be after Baker Mayfield left, right? It was going to be Kyler Murray. I mean, there was no question about it, and I think that makes it a lot easier to kind of keep rolling when you have that clear. Here's who the next guy is. I mean, we're talking about Notre Dame's next guy being an incoming freshman as far as next great quarterback, but he's not a guy that I would view as someone who's going to step in right away and play, because he didn't play as a senior in high school and didn't play as a sophomore in high school. He's played 1 year of football in the last 3 years, right? It's a little different than Trevor Lawrence and, Jalen Hurts and guys like that coming in. So I think the lack of that clear answer of who's next is also going to hurt the leadership point, because there's no quarterback that can necessarily step in the room on the first day of winter workouts and like, I'm the guy. I mean, Jack Cohn can act like that, but Drew Pine's going to want to act like that. Tyler Buckner's going to want to act like that. So I think that's the thing that makes this even more challenging when we look at it from a replacing Ian Book standpoint. Is there was one guy in front of the room the last 2 years, and now there's 4. And so I think that's the other part that needs to get talked about when we talk about what needs to be replaced. And now we'll kind of dive into who those guys that are going to be battling to replace Ian Book are going to be.